Hello and welcome back. We are in part 2 of our grain series and we're going to talk about rendering. So let's get going. We're going to use this grains one, and what I did was I faffed around a little bit with these settings here of the mop spring, and this is what I ended up with. I just kind of played a little bit with these values and now I've cached it out. So I have this, and we will use this as our render. So as always, I'm going to just drop a null and we'll call this render grains. Copy this, and I can just paste this, and I actually like these to be red. So for now, let's set this to be render as particles, and we will talk about this in a little bit. We're not actually going to finish with this, but I want to show you why we're not going to use that. It's much faster, but for now we'll use it for now, but in the end it has some weird artifacts. So I'm just hitting control and the number to set these quick marks, and now I can easily jump in here. So we'll start off with a RS material builder, and we'll call this BG, and this one will be grains. Okay, so we need to create ourselves a backdrop, and I'm going to just use my presets. If you're new, this preset is just a grid with some UVs. Zoom out just so you can see. And then I've bent it with the bend node. And then I've match sized it so that it's in the center of my scene. And then I set that out. Now, the way that I got that in my tab menu is in this little tool set here. You can just grab this and you can just drag it into this. And you see that it adds it. I don't need it because I already have one over there. And you can do this with any objects. The problem is that if you add too many of these in there when Houdini starts up, it's pretty slow because it has to load all of these. So I try and keep them very light, mostly just like small Python scripts. And every now and then I'll have some kind of like little quick setups as well. All right, so you can see our backdrop is pretty big, but we'll leave it like that for now. And let's pick a frame where we have some grains going out. We'll jump back into our camera. Let's go with camera 2. And somebody was asking about how you can make these darker, and you can use an attribute adjust color. And we can remap an attribute. I want to remap color, and if I compute the range and I set this to grayscale, you can see now that it's made these a lot darker. So this is one way to do it, and maybe we want to clamp it to 1. We don't want the values to go over 1. And if you set this to 0, now it's what it was, and you can also just use this slider, and you can kind of clamp these in here. So you lose a little bit of the detail at the back there, especially on this part here. But I think it is clamping it, so it's not actually going past 1 anyway, even though we're pushing this because we're clamping it. So you can use that, but what I generally end up doing is I just do that same ramping thing in Redshift where I can just kind of clamp the values and push them if I need to. I can also use a change range, but you can do it in SOPs as well. So we have our background. Let's just apply our background material, and then our grains. We can apply our grains material. Doesn't want to apply it. Oh, it did apply it. Okay, so let's just create some basic lights. So we'll create an RS light. Before we hit render, let's just put something in the scene. There's nothing worse than the default light. I'm going to set this to a disk. And I think what I want to do with this one is I want the light to come in from this angle here. So my thinking is that it's going to hit it like that. So if you look at our camera angle, there's like a big pile here. And if the light comes in from this top angle, it really highlights these and gives us a little bit of shadow and creates some nice contrast. So that's what I'm going to do with this light over here. So this is going to be our key light. So let's get it over there. We can move it out over here. All right, so something like that is pretty good. I think what I'll do is just make this a little bit bigger, turn down the spread a little bit, and then let's just make it something really low, like a value of 8. Let's actually split left and right. Let's get our Redshift render view going on here. Hit render, and I can see that my light is actually facing the wrong way. So let's just turn it around. And okay, so that's looking better. I think this light is actually too big. Let's just make it smaller and bring it in a little bit. And I think our background it's pretty big, so we can just maybe make it a little bit smaller just so that it's not so huge. And maybe we pull it down so that it doesn't intersect any of our spheres. So you can see here how we get these really nice shadows, and you get this kind of light source on the side. And the other thing I can do is add a dome light. And let's get rid of this so we can see it a little bit better. And for the dome lights, we can use anything, but I'm going to use this Maxime Ross, and I'll use this bathroom one, which I use a lot. So if I turn this light off, you can see that it adds a really nice kind of just light here that I like a lot. So maybe I'll just spin this around and see what I get. So this is without, and this is with. So you can just see it kind of fills out some of these, and you can move it around and decide what you want it to do based on your scene and kind of the way that these are forming, how you want it to look. Let's go with something like minus that, just get these nice shadows in here. Okay, so I have that, which is looking pretty good. Now we need to just formulate some sort of colors. So I'll jump into here, and this one, let's just make it a bit brighter. And the only thing that this is doing is adding GI. So you can see that if I really pump the saturation, it is actually contributing some nice GI here. You can see the blues that it's giving. So I don't want it to have any crazy effects. So it'll be real subtle, maybe just a very slight blue to bounce around the lights. And then we're going to play a lot with this material over here. So the first thing we're going to do is just kind of push up the roughness so that they're not so shiny. And then let's bring in an RS point attribute, and we have our color, refresh. So now we have our colors, and if we add a ramp, what we can do now with this ramp is we can just grab colors. So now you can see we have our ramp. So this is the outside colors, and these ones I ended up making like an off-white. I think it was just a slightly orange. And then it faded to blue in the middle. And then I ended up doing some pinks over here. So if we pipe this into that, you can see beautiful, just exactly the same as mine. So we obviously need to just pull back some of these colors, maybe make this one nice and bright, but not so saturated. Right, and then this pink is also a little bit too intense. And I like that. And we can maybe so as you can see, like as I said, I can just push these values here. So instead of changing it in stops, I can just crunch these values and I get pretty much the same result. All right, so that's looking pretty good. It's pretty much where I started. And one of the things you'll notice is these little kind of highlights. And they were very distracting, especially when you get animations. You can see there's another one here. And that's because we're rendering these as particles. So these are points, and then we're rendering them as particles. Now, there may be a way to fix that. I'm not 100% sure. But what I ended up doing is just turning that off, and I copied some spheres. So I'm going to copy a sphere, turn it into a polygon, just a few subdivisions, and then I'm going to use a copy to points. Now, of course, this is going to be slower than the other method because it's actual packed primitives, and this needs to be 1. I think that's right. Camera. Yeah, okay. So this is definitely slower, but to me, it looks way better, and it's worth the slight hit. It's not that much slower. We can instance top level pack parameters, and if we hit render, you can see that's pretty much real time. And now we have gotten rid of those little kind of imperfections that I wasn't a big fan of. So I think this is a much better way in something like this. Now, the other cool thing with this is that we can add UVs. One of the downsides of rendering this as particles is you can't add UVs to your grains, and you can't kind of do cool textures, as well as subsurface scattering doesn't work as well. Whereas this way we can do that. So that's kind of cool. And I'm going to lean into that to say polar, initialize this. Yep, that looks good. I think they're so small that I don't think the UVs have to be perfect, but just something for our textures to stick to. The other thing I'm going to do is just give myself another attribute. So I'm going to use an, let's jump into this container. So right now, what this doesn't look like it, but these are actually just points. So I can use an attribute randomize over here. And I'm going to randomize color, but I don't want to change color. So I'll just set this to a value called coal. This is my own little value. And then I can use an, and I don't even need this to be a 3-dimensional. This works. So if we visualize coal, I just have a random value. So this works, which is cool. And what I can do now in this is I can pull in and grab coal. If I had render, now I have all these random values between objects, as well as I'll have this one over here. So I can now do something with this. And one of the things that I did with this was I created a ramp, and I'm going to use this to drive the reflection roughness. So let's just pipe this in. Let's just pipe this into reflection roughness, pipe this in, refresh it. And what that'll do now is it will actually bring in both these attributes. Whereas before, because not both of them was plugged into the surface, I had to keep refreshing. So now what I can do is I can kind of just get some that are super bright, and I can maybe even have some in between. So these ones here are going to be maybe a value of 5.7. And at the moment, these ones are going to be very shiny. I don't want them to be completely shiny, maybe a small value like that. If I hit render, you can see some are catching the highlights and then some are a little bit more matte. And I found this was just kind of cool. It just gave a slightly nicer random look. And the other thing we can do is we can also play with the translucency. And I'm not a big fan of the standard material when I want to just do something very basic. You can use this thin wall. If you add this thin wall in, it blocks out all of these, but then you get this subsurface scattering. And then this is supposed to be instead of the translucency. So you can see we can start to get these like subsurface scattering things. So I guess this is the amount. So this should go into the MS color. And then the amount is how much. So I'm not 100% sure how to get the translucency to work. So I'm just going to go back to the RS material. I feel like I've got it pretty dialed in with this one. So it's just a little bit easier to get going. And what I'm actually going to do is use a color correct. And I like to do this a lot where I'll just push the gamma of whatever colors I have and I'll feed them into this backlight translucency, and then I can push this up. So you can see that's without any, and this is with, so it just really brightens them up. And sometimes that's a cool effect that you want, sometimes it's not. And we also want to push this into reflection roughness. So some are rough, some are smooth, and then we have this cool weight. We can also take this attribute and we can make some less than others. So let's just duplicate this, pipe this in, and put this into the weight. So now some will be, if we push this to black and completely white, now some are very, so if we push this like this, you can see these are now very translucent and now they're not translucent. And we can kind of just get a mixture between the two. And then also we can play it with this here. So we push this a little bit. We can also push the saturation if we want. So that's maybe a bit too much. So you get some like very cool values like this. I'm getting this weird purple between here. That. And then the last thing we could do is we could also play with the reflection roughness in terms of a material map. And at the moment we're using this, so we could also use a color layer and use texture maps. So, or a max on noise even. Let's try max on noise, it's a bit easier to get going. Okay, so we have the noise, and we wanted to only affect these ones. So we can use a color layer, or this. So we'll add this into the color mask, and then this one will be the color itself. I think this is right. And then if we view this, this needs to be white. Okay, so you can see now how some are completely white still. So these will be rough. Whatever, yeah, these will be matte, and then these will be some shiny and some matte. So if we pipe this into here, it's a real subtle effect that you probably can't even see, but sometimes it's good to layer up these effects and they start to look pretty good, especially if some of these were a lot bigger. This would be a pretty cool effect, and maybe we need to make this a lot more intense. So now you get some shiny ones that are a little bit with a little bit of a texture. And if we jump ahead, we can maybe just lift this key light up a little bit so that it's not so many shadows. And let's just do a quick bucket render. And so this is pretty much where I ended up. I obviously played a little bit more with the settings in my one, and this is just down to personal taste. You can, some of these here look a little bit too desaturated, so I'd maybe kind of push the saturation on those. Maybe it's a matter of putting a little bit of translucency into everything, because the translucent one looks really nice, and you can see this one's a shiny one, and these ones are matte. And so maybe it's just a matter of kind of finding the right balance. But this is the base setup that I used. So I will see you next time.